Well, hey, you guys, Flickers of Fear time once again. So, this movie here, I'd actually kind of been curious about seeing this one. It's called WNUF Halloween Special, and it came out in 2013. And this is one of those movies that it kept turning up on best Halloween movie lists, like in various places around the internet. So, it's only a week until Halloween, and I saw that Shudder had recently added it to the platform, so I figured, hey, now is as good a time to have a look at it as any. So I kind of feel like WNUF is one of those movies whose origins, like the backstory behind it, pretty much like cements its cult status and I guess like its street cred, like at least in the horror community. So this was filmed on vintage equipment in an old rectory, I think it was, and is kind of partially, I mean, there were bits of it that were like found media from the 1980s, and there's also in there like a bunch of sort of retro aesthetic commercials and network bumpers that were made to look like 1980s. So basically, the movie was shot to like as closely resemble a TV broadcast from 1987 as possible. So the filmmaker behind this, Chris LaMartina, he actually even re-recorded the finished movie on VHS like multiple times, like over and over, to give it the appearance of like a degraded bootleg tape from 1987. You know what I mean? Not only that, but in a really, really, I mean, an amazingly brilliant piece of marketing, I mean, they didn't do any traditional indie distribution at all. What they did was like the crew, the filmmakers, left VHS copies of the movie like on empty tables and in bathrooms at like horror and VHS conventions, like kind of in the, I believe it was mostly in the Northeast. And they left in there like without any explanation. So they wanted to give it that true like found footage vibe, like people just coming across these tapes and being like, what the hell is this? You know what I mean? So to kind of further the air that this is actually just like a real and actual found footage tape, the movie actually has no credits at all, and it plays out exactly as if it was an old tape of a TV show that somebody recorded in the late 1980s. Now, I will say that this conceit is delightful from like a total immersion point of view. Maybe slightly less so from like a creepy Halloween movie kind of angle. You know what I'm saying? I mean, to be fair, the movie is usually billed as a comedy or a horror comedy or a parody, rather than a straight horror film. So don't expect it to be scary. Like, there's no big scares in this or anything like that. Like, it's not nearly as spooky as Ghost Watch, for example, from 1992, but it's along those same lines. Although this one has, like, kind of an additional, like, satanic panic kind of thing going on to it, too. It's a pretty enjoyable watch overall. I think it would be a really fun movie to kind of have playing in the background, like at a Halloween party or something like that. So the core story of WNUF, much like Ghost Watch, or the outstanding Late Night with the Devil from this year, 2024, it centers around a local network's Halloween special, which is going to be a live broadcast of like a field reporter named Frank Stewart who's going to investigate a haunted house. Now, this haunted house was abandoned for many years. I think they said it was 12 years, something like that, after this young man named Donald Weber murdered his parents, and then he later claimed that demons like communicated with him through a Ouija board and told him to do it. So it's kind of like an Amityville horror kind of situation. So since that time, unsurprisingly, the Weber house, as it's called, is rumored to be haunted. Before we get to any of that, though, there is a significant amount of this movie's runtime spent on a local newscast. There's these two anchors named Deborah and Gavin, and they're dressed in like cheesy Halloween costumes, like she's a witch and he's a vampire, and they're just making just endless lame Halloween puns, which is exactly what news anchors would have done in the 1980s. I mean, yeah, it's pretty accurate. They actually cover a couple of different stories on this newscast. There's like a political rivalry between two candidates for governor. They bring up this very small but vocal, like, evangelical Christian group who is protesting Halloween. Like I said, there's kind of that satanic panic element. And there's also a little story about, like, a local dentist named Dr. Allen who's doing, like, a cash for candy trade-in program for Halloween. And every few minutes, just like on a real television broadcast, there are commercials for various things, like a new brand of tampons or a carpet warehouse or a monster truck rally or something like that. There's a couple of anti-drug PSAs in there, very period accurate, and ads for upcoming episodes of kind of ridiculous but still pretty believable by 80s standards, like TV shows, like action kind of shows, and made for TV movies, that kind of thing. So if you grew up in the 70s, 80s, or early 90s, you will likely find this hilariously spot on. I kind of feel like the filmmakers really captured the look and feel of this kind of thing pretty much perfectly. It might not, I guess, like, it might not tickle the same, like, nostalgia bone in younger viewers, I guess, so it might not be as effective for them. Because I will say that WNUF is less like a standard movie and more like a found footage experiment in retro realism. You know what I mean? Because, like I said, they're trying to make it as period accurate as possible. I mean, your mileage may vary depending on how into vintage media you are and how much you admire the filmmakers, like, really, like, all-in commitment to the bit, because they really do commit. So after the news broadcast part is over, and the anchors have been frequently, like, hyping up this live haunted house investigation, stay tuned after the broadcast, here's going to be this, like, live thing for Halloween. So we finally get to the Halloween special proper. So as previously mentioned, we're now following the reporter, Frank Stewart, on site at the Weber house. Now, in between more commercials, and then, like, he does occasional check-ins from his producer. His name is Veronica. She's, like, in a van outside. And he interviews, like, a bunch of people in Halloween costumes who are kind of, like, gathered outside the house, like, just so they can be on TV, you know what I mean? And that goes about as well as you'd expect. Like, people are, like, really nervous and saying dumb shit and everything like that. So, from the jump, we can tell that Frank is very skeptical, and he's kind of like a hardened newsman type of situation, and he pretty obviously, like, thinks this whole special is kind of a farce, but is just going along with it, like, for the sake of his job, I guess. And then at one point, one of the Christian protesters, like they had talked about on the earlier newscast, like, yells something, like, trying to interrupt the thing. It's like, Satan or whatever. I don't remember what they yelled. But Frank, like, yells back at him and shuts it down. And the person kind of gets escorted away off screen. But, like, these protesters kind of pop up, like, here and there. And they do kind of end up factoring into the plot later on. So then there's kind of, like, they air part of, like, a little bit of, like, a canned, like, documentary style clip about the Weber murders, like, presumably to give the viewers of this special some context about what happened in the house and everything like that. And then Frank introduces his sidekicks for the evening, paranormal investigators Dr. Louis Berger and his wife Claire Berger, as well as their psychic cat Shadow, who is an adorable kitty. The Bergers are very, very obviously based on Ed and Lorraine Warren, which I found very, very amusing. So Frank interviews these two, like, outside the house, and then the costume people in the back are kind of, like, looking on. And that takes a while, like, the interview and everything. But at long last, it's time to go inside for the investigation. They're also going to have, and they hype this up a lot too, is they're going to have a call-in seance, like, that people at home can call and participate in, you know what I mean? But first, there's another commercial break. So yeah, as realistic as this is, and it is realistic, I will admit that it does get a little repetitive and a little aggravating, like having the special go to commercial every few minutes. Because like I said, even though that's what would happen in real life, some of the commercials are even, like, repeated more than once, just like on real TV. Like, I think the carpet warehouse one, like, turned up a couple of times. Although I will say in most cases, if a commercial had already been shown once, like earlier, or a news story was getting too boring, the unseen viewer who's watching this tape would fast forward through it. So there's times, like, where it fast forwards through. So there's that. So it's not like you're sitting there watching the same commercial over and over. But I will say, by that same token, you can totally see why the makers of the recent movie Late Night with the Devil, who kind of were going for the same thing, like a late night live TV show, chose to use the commercial break segments, like, to show what was going on backstage rather than showing actual commercials. So Frank and the Bergers go inside the house, and they get joined by this priest, an ostensible priest, named Father Joseph Matheson. And he seems a little bit freaked out and kind of, like, inexperienced. We later find out, spoiler alert, that that's because he's actually not a priest. He's actually an actor that was hired by the network, like, to make things more spooky or whatever. So not long after going inside, Claire Berger says something is very dangerous in this house. I don't think it's the people that were murdered here, implying that it's maybe a demon or something like that. And then a few minutes later, like their cat, who is psychic, like they said, Shadow, she apparently gets a psychic compulsion and like runs upstairs. So the Burgers like run after the cat, being like, oh my God, there must be something horrible going on up there. And then Frank is like interviewing the priest, asking him if he'd be willing to do an exorcism if it becomes necessary. And the priest is like trying to like blow him off, like, well, you need church approval for that, and I'm not really qualified, and blah blah. Like he's basically like trying to, like I said, it makes a lot more sense when you find out later that he's not actually a priest and he's just trying to like stave off and like answer shit as best as he can without having to actually do anything. Now they do eventually have the call-in seance as well, but just as it likely would be in real life, it's almost exclusively comprised of like prank callers. Ghostwatch did this too. I think they, when they had people call in, like there were a couple of drunk people called and stuff like that just to add to the realism of it. But this one I think is pretty much all prank callers. So from this point forward, things go about as you would expect. Everybody hears weird noises. The cat goes missing. Cat doesn't make it, unfortunately. And I'm kind of not over it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it turns up, like, torn up, like, later on. So, so just know that going in. The Burgers' equipment, like, all their recording equipment and stuff like that, is mysteriously wrecked, like, when their backs are turned. Like, that kind of stuff. So, as, like, shit starts hitting the fan, the network starts cutting, like, abruptly to commercials or to news clips from earlier, like, technical difficulties type of thing. But bits and pieces from the live broadcast, as it's going south, are kind of sprinkled in here and there. So giving kind of an indication of what might have happened. And then at the end of the movie, there's a later news broadcast shown where the anchors from earlier report that Frank and the Burgers haven't been seen since Halloween night. I think it's like a week later, and no one knows what happened to them. And then, like, to make a statement, I guess, like, they then just carry on to the next story, like, with their fake smiles, like, anyway, here we go with this silly story, you know what I mean? Like, as if nothing had happened, or as if their colleague wasn't, like, missing and presumably dead. So, I'm gonna say, like, as a piece of immersive art, and an exercise in very, very precise, like, VHS-era replication, WNUF Halloween Special is a triumph, really. And it will definitely appeal to people of a certain age, like me, who will just, like, immediately recognize all the tropes and all the visuals that are being parodied here. Lovingly parodied, I will say that. As a movie, I kind of feel like it's a little bit less successful, for a couple of reasons. Like, it has very frequent, like, commercial interruptions, and that kind of undercuts any sense of narrative or tension or anything like that. And it kind of makes the whole special seem a bit disjointed because it keeps cutting away to silly, like, Carpet Warehouse and tampon commercials and stuff. I also felt like it took a little bit too long to get into the Weber house in the first place. Like, that newscast went on a long time, and then he was outside, like, interviewing people for a long time before they actually went in there. So they're actually only in the house for, like, a few minutes. So the final act of them going through the haunting seemed to be, like, over too quickly and maybe not worth all the lead up. That said, however, I suspect that the filmmaker, Chris LaMartina, was maybe less concerned with making an actually scary, like, found footage movie, and more with trying to make the thing as period accurate as possible. Like I said, it almost seems like an analog, like VHS, like an experiment, you know what I mean? Or, like, more like a piece of art rather than trying to make, like a scary movie. So how you feel about that will determine, like, how much you'll enjoy this movie as an experience. Personally, I had a lot of fun with it, but I felt it would have benefited from starting the live special portion where they go into the house, like, much earlier in the runtime, maybe going lighter on the commercials. I also, you know what, I wouldn't have even minded all the commercials if they had made the commercials more Halloween specific or, like, Halloween adjacent, so it would give the film, like, more of a cohesive, like, holiday vibe to it, because as it is, like, some of the commercials are, Halloween kind of stuff. Like, hey, here's this dentist, and he'll give you, like, $1 for every pound of Halloween candy you bring him, or whatever. But it's like, most of them are just, like, generic commercials, you know what I mean? Like you would see just regularly. I will say, though, I admire the hell out of every single person, like, involved in this project, just for how eerily authentic, like, they managed to make it, and how very meticulously, like all the details of this were considered. So I'm gonna say like it's a really, really great achievement in found footage. And even though, you know, just for my taste, it wasn't really scary or it wasn't like Halloweeny enough, I mean, it's definitely a seasonal cult classic for a reason. By the way, there is also a sequel, sort of, called Out There Halloween Mega Tape that came out in 2022. And it's set up like a talk show from the 1990s. I haven't seen it yet. It doesn't seem like it's available to buy anywhere. I don't know if you can stream it anywhere. I don't know if they marketed it the same, because when WNUF Halloween special first came out, like I said, they distributed it on VHS tapes just and left them at conventions and stuff. So for a long time, you couldn't get it anywhere. Like you couldn't buy a DVD or a Blu-ray of it or anything like that. Then later on, like as it kind of word got out about it, like, you know, it got picked up by a distributor. So I don't know if the same thing is true of Out There Halloween Mega Tape. There's no Blu-ray, there's no DVD. Like I looked it up on Amazon and it's like nothing came up except for, you know, the first movie. So I don't know, but eventually I'd be kind of interested to see it, to see what they did with the 1990s talk show format, which is still kind of like a Halloween thing as far as I could determine. So that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. Hope, as always, that you enjoyed the video. And please, if you did, remember, like, share, subscribe, and comment. And I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.